Here with Rabbi Benjamin Shalva, who is a rabbi based out of Baltimore and a writer on spirituality and a meditation teacher and so much more. And one of his interesting recent books is on the topic of spiritual cross-training, searching through silence, stretch, and song. So thanks for taking a little time to talk about this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, based on your own life experience and Jewish journey or spiritual journey, how did you arrive at this idea of spiritual cross-training?
Right. Well, it really came out of my life. I was brought up Jewish in Reformed Jewish Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and but at about the age 18, I started exploring other modalities of spirituality. I was involved in Zen meditation and yoga. I explored theater and music and dance, which I also consider spiritual paths. And it wasn't until I was well into my 30s that I started to look back and see that when I looked at my spiritual path, it had been this path of cross-training, of moving through different types of spiritual modes and putting them together. So the idea for this book and this idea of spiritual cross-training came out of, I think, what felt messy in the time, but turned out to be, I think, a helpful way to approach spirituality.
So when you say cross-training, I presume that means that multiple disciplines are really necessary. So why do you believe that? Because I think some approach to spirituality as saying, I have my one path or activity that I engage with. What do you think is added or even necessary with having multiple approaches?
Well, one of the things I think is so helpful about cross-training is when you approach spirituality like a cross-training regimen, where you're doing different types of spiritual work at different times, it never allows you to get too comfortable and too fixed in one mode. I really feel that we meet God at the edge, when we're up there, when we're not totally stable, when we feel maybe a little bit of fear and trembling, but there's also such an opportunity in those moments to really find out who we are and really connect with something larger. I like it when spiritual practice pushes me off balance. In the moment, I sometimes feel it's difficult, but I find there's a real benefit to that. The other thing that I would say is that the specific 3 types of work that I propose in the book, which is some practice of silence, some practice of stretching, which involves something when working with the body and movement, and some practice of song, which is some devotional or artistic work. I find that these 3 practices help us connect with 3 different types of resistance that we have to spiritual life. And each one helps us work through that resistance. If you just did one, I think you would be missing some of the resistances in the other 2 realms, and because of that, not having as I would say, a well-rounded and developed spiritual life.
What are these forces of resistance?
So silence, the practice of silence, introduces us to our addiction to words and our often dependence on avoiding the deeper questions of life by talking our way out of it. When you have to sit silently in let's say a meditation retreat, or even just for 20 minutes, on a cushion in your bedroom, let's say, you run into a certain desperation. I gotta speak, I'm sick of this silence, I just wanna say something. And it really helps you move through that and recognize that before you say a word, you're already enough. That's a powerful thing to see. With stretching, you run into the resistance of our bodies absorb tension and trauma and hold them in our tissues. And a practice of movement helps us relieve ourselves of some of that stored tension and trauma, which allows us to be more present. And then song, which again could be prayer, theater, music, drum circle, whatever it is, that introduces us often to our sense of shame, because when we're singing full, we're putting ourselves out there and risking being embarrassed. And for some of us, that's so hard to do, but that's so important, I think, to, as they say, sing a new song to God. Yeah.
So what's Jewish about all this?
So what I think is Jewish about all this is, first of all, our sages and our tradition programmed a spiritual cross-training regimen into our liturgical and devotional life. It's already there. I don't think necessarily that many Jews in the 21st century have experienced it as such, because I think our version of Judaism today is a little more cerebral and less breath-based and body-based and devotional that way. But if you look at the roots of it, let's just say in our liturgy, silence. We're told that the sages would meditate for an hour before they'd pray. We have a period of silence leading up to the Shema. We have the Amidah, which is the silent prayer. Stretching, we have the morning blessings, which we're told originally you said as you were stretching and opening your body. Song, we have this invitation to sing out to God and with a full throat. King David saying, "All my bones are celebrating God." It's right there in Judaism, and I find that when I introduce spiritual cross training to Jewish groups, I'm essentially saying, look at our tradition and reinvest it with the type of energy you would bring to the yoga practice or the meditation or the drum circle, and you can bring it to your Jewish life. Yeah.
So as you touched on, I think many people left Jewish life because they didn't feel that spiritual energy.
I agree.
Or they tested it out and they just found that it didn't actually find it to be a transformative force.
That's right.
So I think not only for sustaining and renewing Jewish life, but for transforming us as vehicles for creating a more peaceful, loving, just world, we need to be engaged in a spiritual practice. I think oftentimes we talk about it as if it's a cherry on top. Okay, you have everything, now have a spiritual experience.
Yeah, a little something
as opposed
on the
to
side,
it being actually the essence of what we're doing here, right? That we have this existence that has to be cultivated and nourished. And I don't know how we make that switch. I don't know if you have any sense that this isn't just a cherry on top, but actually foundational both to Jewish life and to human experience.
Well, I think we make that switch by making some very basic connections. When I teach meditation, I help reintroduce, let's say, individuals to mantra practice. And I say something like, okay, now this might feel a little different to you, but what we're going to do is we're going to say a word or a phrase, and we're going to repeat it over and over. And if you can imagine, what you might want to do is take this word or phrase and put it on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Say it when you lie down, when you rise up. I start to make connections between mantra practice, which seems esoteric and strange, and the Judaism that people already know, let's say the Shema. And what I do is I try to make those connections and then use little nuggets of Judaism and kind of elevate and enliven them. But I think by doing that, then what I'm showing is that the Jewish life that people think of often as mind-based and cerebral does have a spiritual component to it already. And it's in there, and it's almost an issue of not necessarily even doing anything different, but investing what we've already been doing with a different kavanah, a different intention.
Beautiful. So it feels like in post-modernity, in 21st century America, I couldn't think of anything we need more than self-awareness, reflection, mindfulness, intentionality, sacred attunement, if you will, spiritual direction that's going to help us to emanate the type of energy that our society filled with ambition addiction and fear and survivalistic fear-based tendencies is in desperate need of. So Rabbi Benjamin Shalva can help us get there. Check out his books and check out the wonderful work he's doing all over the country and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.